Hi, Michelle. Hi, Dorothy. Hi, Kerry. Hi, Tiger. Very good to see you all. Well, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for staying with us throughout yesterday and this morning. And thank you just to our previous panel, Catherine, Doris, and Stephen. Great session there that we will hopefully follow on from. So our next session, this session, is on the evolving nature of the relationship between the Chief People Officer and the Chief Executive Officer. And I'm really thrilled to be joined by some familiar and friendly, which is always nice, faces in this session. I'm joined by one of the best COOs in the business, Dorothy Brown, who is the CEO of the British Red Cross. And I've also got not one, not two, but three leaders who feature in HR Magazine's top 30 most influential people directors in the country. So I am outgunned and outmanned on this call, but looking forward to the conversation. I have with me Dorothy, as I mentioned. We've got Michelle Clark from the Children's Society, Tiger D'Souza from Samaritans, and Kerry Smith from the British Heart Foundation. Welcome, nice to see you all in a rather different context to how we normally talk. Jumping in because we don't have a lot of time. Dorothy, I'm going to start with you if I may. And we've talked, all of us, about how a lot is being thrown at organisations and particularly charities and non-profits. And a lot's been thrown at them and other leaders over the last 5 years. And the world seems to be getting more complex, more volatile, and certainly faster. Right? So not only are organisations very correctly, very appropriately becoming more diverse, but now we've got 5 generations in the workplace, with all the kind of attendant opportunities and challenges and requests that comes with that. And you and I have had lots of conversations where you've talked about the importance of senior leaders taking on that role beyond the functional anchor to be enterprise-wide leaders, which is why the 4 of you are here today. So maybe to kick us off, how have you seen the relationship change between Chief Exec and Chief People Officer, Chief Exec and COO and with the wider organisation over the last maybe 5 years, Dorothy?
Hi. Yeah, I definitely have seen a shift. And I think probably the biggest shift is that recognition that people are not just their professional anchor. Traditionally, often in the past, that if you were the chief people officer or the chief finance officer or the chief information officer, that, you absolutely were grounded in your profession, of course. But increasingly, that enterprise piece about you are there to influence and lead and make connections and help a whole organisation move in cohesion rather than, my part of the organisation is really strong and we're very good in the people space and we're really good in the finance space. It's actually, what is the cohesion between those professional areas to strengthen and build resilience in the whole organisation? So, certainly I came to BRC as a CPO and then got appointed to the COO with a greater remit. And the relationship with the CEO became one of not just a trusted advisor in your particular areas, but a co-partner in driving the organisation in the right direction. And it's interesting, it's on 2 levels. One is on that very personal level, depending on your relationship with the CEO, which is you must be the trusted confidant, but also the trusted challenger, and be able to speak truth and help the CEO. And the other one is on that organizational cohesion. How do you help the organization and me as the CEO to be in more than one place? Because none of us as leaders can be in individual places, but actually, if you are confident that your part of the organization or your leadership role is influencing other people to do the right thing and operate in that cohesive way, then you are influencing them. So definitely what has changed is you are no longer seen as just your professional anchor, and many of us never were, but you are seen as somebody who is driving the organization, not just a particular part of it, and that makes it very impactful. Impactful, yeah, I would say.
Really
Greater
helpful,
impact.
Dorothy. Really helpful. And lots stands out there, but two words in particular I just want to come back to. Influence. Well, we have the three of the top 30 most influential. So that word's going to come up a few times, and I want to pick that up. And then this idea of cohesion. So Kerry, I'm going to turn to you if I may, and just think, because I know you at the BHF are in constant evolution. There's always new
Mhm.
ideas coming from outside in. So what
Mhm.
kind of lessons can you share about that? The increasingly different realities of your workplace and how you maintain that cohesion.
Yeah, thank you, Kai. And Dorothy's absolutely so right. In so much has changed in the last few years as well. Just to give my reflection on that too, that actually I think COVID made such a difference to the people agenda. It catapulted people to the top of a business risk and business agenda. And suddenly we found ourselves as CPOs navigating something we'd never done. We never had to do at such a high level and a high profile before, and it raised the profile of not only the relationship between the CPO and the CEO, who had to work absolutely hand in hand through that kind of crisis situation, but there on onwards, it enabled us to think more carefully, recognizing that if you don't have your people, you can't run an organization, and people are front and center. And whereas a lot of organizations will think about their finances up to that point, suddenly there's a focus here that meant we had to think much more carefully, strategically, and be prepared for anything around our people agenda. So that transformed, and I know we're all aware of this, and this isn't new news, but it's the impact it had on HR and the people agenda that is the big takeaway from that situation. And to your answer, that therefore has meant that we've needed to keep the people agendas, the people risks, the people challenges top of an executive's pad, if you like. So it's all there's never been a busier time, if you like, for a CPO to be working so closely with the CEO, because everything that the CEO should be thinking about, so should the CPO be thinking about. So that kind of cohesion, that need to be thinking across the whole organization. So whilst back to the pandemic, it wasn't just about dealing with furlough or getting people into their jobs or pausing them. It was about the survival of the organization. And suddenly we found ourselves in a situation where we, in partnership with the CEO, were fighting for the survival of that organization. And it, as I say, it catapulted us into that front line of business issues. And ever since then, all the challenges that have come our way, whether it's social injustice, whether it's EDI, diversity, where people have felt we haven't done enough in that space, we've needed to lean into that together, whether it's well-being, whether it's skills, whether it's just making sure that we are fit to perform, and our kind of always the way that we hold ourselves to account on that is to always be thinking about what's the right thing for our mission. And so that's our North Star, what we do, why we're here, and the decisions we need to make around our people have got to be guided by our mission.
Really helpful, Kerry. And Tiger, I'm going to come to you in a moment, but Michelle, I could see you nodding there. And I imagine part of that is I know how much work has been done very boldly, very bravely at the Children's Society to take some quite dramatic changes, and also because you have, as an audience, as a cohort, young people who have very different ideas of how they want to engage with you. So maybe some of your reflections on what Kerry and Dorothy have been saying.
Thanks, Kai. Yeah, it's really good to hear the reflections. I think the word that was kind of coming out to me then when both Dorothy and Kerry were talking was complexity. So we're operating and living in such a complex world and environment with complex lives. And actually, we see a mirroring of that between the young people that my charity particularly are there for, work for, serve, are trying to create that better hope and chance in life. And the complexity around their lives and is matched, I guess, with what we're seeing from our employees and our volunteers is complexity. And what that has meant, I think, is for us in our roles is suddenly you're having to have a breadth of awareness, a breadth of understanding, and think about all of the different skills that are needed to manage around all of those complexities. And it's really important that, for me, especially, I know for my colleagues on screen, that, we hold the people conscience of the organization. And actually, it is complex and it is quite weighty. So that relationship with the CEO is so incredibly important because the CEO, in order to be able to guide and, to, as Kerry was saying, keeping the vision and the direction on what our North Star is, what we're aiming towards, has to bring people with them. And in order to do that, needs to understand that the complex nature that we're all operating in and working in. And so it's so important that my role is making sure that the CEO is aware, is able to kind of navigate that amongst everything else in order to keep this organization moving forward. So yeah, I think the other thing as well, it's for me especially, with all of that complexity, it's been so important that I have a really strong relationship with the CEO. It's always been important. Let's be honest, when you're in these roles, if you don't have the support of the CEO, it's pretty much a nightmare. It's non-existent in terms of what you're trying to drive. But that has been so crucial, and I've been lucky to have an excellent relationship with my CEO who gets it, but who works with me to navigate those difficulties and the challenges that we are constantly sort of faced with. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of bring that theme of complexity out because I think it's an important word to acknowledge, and also the kind of pressure that it puts on all of us, and it's important that we're all working on that together.
Thank you. And I guess that idea that Dorothy brought up about being the challenger and the co-partner is what you're also, if the environment is challenging, you have to be prepared to put yourself into that complexity and into that world of challenge. Tiger, I'm going to bring you in if I may. You've led both the volunteering function in a couple of places and the broader staffing function, and then brought those two together. Now we're talking about 5 generations in a workplace. Lots of different styles, lots of different expectations. Following on from Michelle's point, how do you help the chief exec, how do you help Julie balance purpose and performance, or balance impact with maintaining a culture when actually these 5 generations in all their complexity might want lots and lots of different things?
Yeah, I think we're all fortunate because we work in the charity sector in the sense of actually purpose is quite easy to define. And I think the nuance is actually we're all agreed on how we're trying to respond to that, delivery against that purpose, because there might be some variations. And I think that I see my role not only in terms of working in tandem with the CEO, which I think is a really important relationship, but it's also the wider executive team. Because actually, when you're starting to talk about things like culture or performance management, you actually need your entire top team aligned on what that means in practice. And I think it's very easy to be in an environment where you're gathered together as a collective and you're brainstorming, you're talking about the future you want to lead for, and you have a shared vision of this is how we are going to collectively lead the organization. But the reality is that for all of us, that will be changing elements around the way we normally work, because we're fitting into this environment. And the risk is that whilst we could all collectively sign up to that in the room, how good are we at consistently then displaying role modeling and enabling and delivering that when we then go back out into the organization? And the real challenge, I think, for all of us in CPO roles is that the chinks will start to show if the leadership team are not aligned. And so there is something about you and the CEO being really clear around kind of what the organisation is they want to create, and then you develop that further as a wider leadership team. But yeah, how do you effectively, I guess, equip and enable your colleagues and your counterparts to be able to then lead that wholeheartedly? And I guess, the environment we're in now is one that, I mean, the pandemic was one thing, but I think we're now in an environment where the evolution of the workplace is going to be rapid.
Yeah.
And actually, we don't have the ability necessarily to respond and to manage change in the way that we've historically done it. And so I think the biggest question for our leadership team is, how do you build an organization that is change ready? So you might go through some form of transformation, but actually you're all aligned on that sense of continuous improvement, and that you are naturally going to have to adapt, and you've got the guiding principles that will drive you, but you are ready for whatever change is going to come next, because we can't lurch from one change program to another, because it's just not going to be sustainable or deliverable.
And I guess change is the one constant, right? Ironically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But very, very interesting that you raised that idea of enabling colleagues, of trying to create the dynamic between the senior leadership and I imagine also the board to equip them to deal with this kind of constancy of change. And at the same time, we're also hearing a lot in the sector about CEO burnout. Some leaders have left. I mean, I see you all nodding to that. So just return to that bit of the dynamic, that relationship. You have to look after yourselves, you have to look after the wider organization, and you've got a chief exec who may be burning out. How's that dynamic playing out, Dorothy? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think it is. There's never been, I would say, certainly from my perspective in the BRC, there's never been a time where we've had so much demand playing out. The demand from both within the UK and obviously our international part is huge. And because people are, cause-led humanitarians, they want to keep doing things, and that includes senior leaders. They feel somehow it's a weakness if they stop. And we keep having to remind ourselves as senior leaders and our colleagues at the front line, you can't be there for people if you're burnt out. So therefore, we've got to do and look at well-being and taking care of ourselves. And it's interesting because we recently ran an event in BRC with our senior leadership team where we tried something different. We had an open session where we talked as the senior leaders what it felt like right now. To be under that kind of pressure, and it was facilitated by myself and the CEO, and that goes back to the emphasis around this. The two of us had to be completely in line with, is this a good idea? Is this a good thing to do? How are we going to manage it? How are we going to work it between the two of us? And how do you make it that it's not just us asking questions and people feeling vulnerable if they kind of name something? And it was really incredibly eye-opening in that, well, first of all, you have to have a sense of trust. It was in one of our regular senior leadership get-together, so there'd be about 30 of us. But it was very, we got lots of good feedback afterwards because people said it just felt good to be able to say, this is hard, this is tough, this is what it feels like. And maybe this is what we ought to be thinking about doing as a leadership team to help ourselves. Because we all talk about vulnerability as leaders, don't we? And all of us need to be able to feel we can do that, but not in an artificial, superficial way. This was a kind of a bit of an experiment, but it allowed both the CEO to be vulnerable, but also the leadership team. And we took some actions as a result of it. Doesn't make all the pressure go away, but it did help with that sense of, if we don't shout out when things are getting tough, then how do we expect others to be able to do that? And I think the only other point I would make is, and I guess my other colleagues on the call would say this, again, the CPO helping the CEO, me as the coup helping the CEO, really be forensic about prioritization. We all talk about doing that. We all talk about the need for it, but sometimes we do it, and then guess what? We still will do a bit more of this, and oh yes, let's do a bit more of that. And I do think the CPO in particular is a great challenge to the CEO to say, hang on a minute, we said we would really prioritize. You're asking people to do more. We're asking people to do more. And there's a saying somewhere, isn't it, that it's about you manage things, you lead people. And I think the CPO can be a great conscience pricker to an organisation when they just start to focus on managing the organisation and the things we have to do. We can keep saying, but we lead people. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? That idea of strategically, you have to sacrifice some things, you have to do fewer things and prioritize. If everything's a priority, you don't do it. Michelle, I'm going to turn it slightly on its head, if I may. We've talked a lot about what you each are doing as influencers and shapers of your organization, and enabling and aligning and, dare I say it, looking after your chief execs. What about the other way around? How do the chief execs look after each of you? Because without you, they're going to be quite stuck.
Yeah. And I think I'm going to say another word that was coming to mind as Dorothy was talking. And I think that word is, and it might be controversial for some, but is vulnerability. And I think in leadership roles, there's, traditionally it's always, I guess you've got to be seen to be having it all together all the time. And I think it's just not possible in this in this day and age, in all that we've been talking about, and actually having that relationship with the CEO where you are able to be vulnerable, I think is really important. Because that then enables, we talk a good game about being human, right? We are human. And actually, when you're thinking about burnout, and some of the things that you're dealing with and some of the challenges that you're facing in the moment, or as Tiger says, you're looking ahead to the immediate future and you're thinking we need to maneuver and get this organization into a different space. There's a lot that weighs down on you. So, and I think it's important that there's that openness to be able to say, do you know what, this is tough, and actually I do need support from you. I need to be able to talk these things through with you. I also need to be able to have a bit of space as well. And so for me, what's worked is having that opportunity to have a bit of space every now and again. But I think also just having the relationship where I can talk quite freely about that. And that encourages the same, that's a kind of same approach. And I think vulnerability is not something to be afraid of when we're in these positions and we're trying to, keep an organization moving in the right direction and keep everybody on track. And I just feel for me that's something that I have got more comfortable with talking about as the kind of most recent years have gone on.
I can imagine demonstrating, showing vulnerability is also quite exposing.
Yes.
By its nature, right? And you can attract criticism. You can take more flack because, as you say, we've had it instilled in us that you have to be really together, that you really know what you're doing, that it's all going to be okay, and we're all heroes in our own head. I want from you, and you're not giving it to me because whatever. But earning that right to that space, if you like, I guess comes from going back to the beginning of what Kerry and Dorothy were talking about, that trusted advisor, that co-partner, that challenger that you say, when I'm needed, I'm here to really stress test the ideas amongst the leadership team. But I also need to be able to say to you when it might not be working, when there may be fragilities, when there might be some failure. Kerry, you and I have talked a number of times about the need to be able to be vulnerable and to be able to talk about failure, because certainly the BHF, and I know in the other organizations as well, you're constantly looking for other things from the outside, bringing it in, trying things, innovating things, testing even better practice. So how do you go about creating that sense of vulnerability and space whilst also pushing things forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Kai. I think with I went to recently. I went to a kind of talk with Ipsos Mori, being from a research centric organisation. It's important to consider data and evidence from other organisations that has got that validity and authenticity that comes with it. So very recently, we had Ipsos Mori come and talk to us about the kind of public sentiment. So we could consider it from 7.6 million people with heart disease, people in NHS waiting lists, and access to good care across across the UK, as well as from a kind of internal looking at the organisation perspective. And one of the things that they said is that the results, the kind of public sentiment, are that we are halfway through the most restless decade that we've ever known. And that halfway through tells two stories, doesn't it? It tells us one story that we've actually managed to get halfway through the most restless decade, and we're still here and we're still doing very well. But it also tells us that there's a lot more change and kind of uncertainty that's going to come our way. And so facing into some of that, sharing that, and interestingly, that was a session that we had just with our executive, but we were all very open to then say, do you know what, we've got to think about this with all our senior leaders. So we've been very openly talking to all our senior leaders about, we have got uncertainty ahead of us, and let's not, kid ourselves that we haven't. But we need to think about what that means for us and how we can make sure that we're ready and prepared for what we don't know. What we don't know is coming. And thinking about the things that we can change and we can make a difference to is always our primary focus, because in that period of uncertainty, you've got to look at what you can do. And that's where I'm back to our mission. That's where our mission and purpose comes in, because we want to make that difference to people with heart disease. We want to make that difference to the people that are doing the research for people with heart disease. So our focus has got to always kind of be there, and then looking at what we can do internally as an organisation to support our people to deliver that too. So I think one of the things that I've found particularly helpful with my CEO is actually kind of exploring some of these concepts and challenges, and how we're going to widen the debate, how we're going to bring others into the conversation. And often that has meant bringing in external organisations. So I gave you the example of Ipsos Mori, but we would also look at where we know other organisations are doing this really well, or thinking about and preparing for the future. We might bring them in. There might be other private sector organisations, there might be other charities, but we will find those good examples and bring them in, and other thought leaders that can just help us kind of debate more openly. So this isn't a closed door, me and the chief exec, or me and the chief executive and the executive team. This could be across all our senior leaders having these debates, so that there's a shared ownership and shared understanding of the challenges that we're going to face to deliver our mission and to run the organisation, but also shared ownership of the solutions that might come from that as well.
Really interesting. Okay, really interesting. And just as an aside, looking at the chat that I've got here in front of me, the kind of vulnerability debate has spiked a lot of commentary, as you may see. So Julian Nicholas has said, vulnerability is an interesting word. Used today, it includes an element of courage to be in an uncomfortable space and bravery to being open to new ways of thinking. What a fantastic comment, and I applaud that totally. And
Kai, can I just to add to that, I do think that a strong relationship between, that's what we're here to talk about, the CEO and the CPO. If you can share your vulnerabilities with each other, support each other, look after each other, actually look after, it's a mutual relationship in that regard, then I feel you can hold hands and face anything. I think it gives you a position of strength if you can do that, but it's based on deep trust sustain trust, but also, making sure that you are looking after each other mutually.
Yeah, no, I think that's super important. And Tiger, I'm going to turn to you for a lot of reasons, but one of them being you are and have been for a long time looking for and exploring different ways to lead, whether it's co-leadership, whether it's moving beyond your functional anchor, as Dorothy talked about. A lot of your career has been about challenging your organizations and the wider sector to think a bit differently. So not to have the closed door, but to be very open. I know you post on this, you blog on this. So I just wanted to turn to you a little bit. As you're innovating, what do you see as the emerging issues that are most likely to change the relationship between the CPO and the CEO, and maybe even more interestingly, between the CPO and its organization?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I guess my start point is that I was very selective about who I would work for. And so I'm the newest kid on the CPO block in this room. So I'm only 2.5 years into my first exec role, but spent some time thinking about who would I work for. And I think there's something around alignment. And so making sure that if I'm signing up to work for an organization, that you're not expecting like complete synergy, but what you want to know is that are my values, are the principles, are the things that I hold dear in terms of my practice replicated within the views and the thoughts and the perspectives of my prospective CEO, or are they open to them? And if they are not, then I wouldn't want to go and work there. And I think there is an interesting element that's happening in terms of, we're seeing some of it in terms of organizations pulling away from EDI, in terms of some organizations, trying to mandate a complete return to the office. So there's a whole raft of conversations and discussions that are happening. And where I'm seeing those, my immediate wondering is that CEO/board led and driven, or is that CPO involved in that conversation and actually they're alongside those kinds of things? Because I think the way we've worked historically is gone. And I think the way we'll work in the future will be fundamentally different to the way we're working now. And so I feel it's really important for CEOs who might have a more retrospective view on the world of work, to be both mindful of that opinion, but also open to bringing someone in and being receptive to challenge that might come from their CPO. Because I think that the fundamental thing for all of us is that we have to be fleet of foot if we are going to attract, retain, and hold on to the talent that we know will help our organisation to deliver whatever its objectives are. So I think I'd almost flip the question on its head and say that I think that for CEOs, there's going to be a growing number of people that are coming out, and the future generations of CPOs that are going to come through, that are going to have ideas about the way the world of work is going and thoughts about how they want to play a proactive role in shaping that and innovating and developing new practices, and to empower and enable the organisation to do so. And so I think CEOs need to be mindful of that if they want to stay at the top of their game and their organisations to be successful.
When you say mindful, Tiger, can you just unlock that just a little bit further?
So I think there's the potential to say all the right things about, yes, I want our organisation to be progressive. Yes, I recognise that EDI is important. Yes, I think that culture is really the fundamental around organisations. Yes, I understand and appreciate that a remote working environment might be the future for us, and we might need to do things differently. So you can think that and you can say those kinds of things, but do you really mean it? Because I think what I've noticed and I've seen is some people who say all the right things about the way the world might be evolving, but the reality is that they are wedded to, or they feel fixated upon, maintaining the status quo as much as possible. And so when I say mindful, I think don't just think about what you say. I would challenge people to think, do you authentically believe that, and are you open to that? And if not, why not?
I see a lot of nods. Colleagues, some follow up to that?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I agree with that. And I think, again, the changing nature of that relationship is, I think HR have really moved and CPOs in particular have moved into that space where they enable CEOs not to just see the people agenda and the things that support it about compliance or good practice or regulation. It's moving from that to commitment to things that actually, if you genuinely believe in driving an agenda where people realise their potential, etc., then you do it because it's the right thing to do, not because everywhere should have an EDI policy and
Yeah.
everywhere should have good pay strategies and everywhere should have good recruitment practices. It's actually, what is it we genuinely believe in and what should be in our DNA as the way that this organisation interacts with its people. And again, I mean, like many of the speakers or all of the speakers, your relationship with the CEO in this space is critical. And I too am really lucky to have a brilliant relationship and work very closely with my CEO. So it does allow you to have those moments that if sometimes you think, do you know what? You're focusing a bit too much on that. And actually, we've lost a little bit of sight of that. You can be honest and say those things. And I think gone is the world where we used to have all those big charismatic CEOs that everybody followed. And we all know, the job of leadership is to create more leaders, not more followers. It's more leaders. That's our job. How do we grow the next generation of leaders? Yeah.
Very good point.
I want to pick up on that, and I'm conscious we've just got 2 or 3 minutes before we have to bring this interesting conversation to a close. Each of you has a chief executive who, certainly on the public stage, celebrates you. All right, and I know each of your chief execs, and they speak very highly of each of you very publicly. Right, and I'm sure you'd want more of that, but they do that. So they are hopefully giving you the space and time to challenge them. But let's just get a very quick 30 seconds, a minute from each of you on if the job of leaders is to create new leaders, what advice would each of you give the next generation of people directors for them to succeed? Kerry, I'm going to go to you first, if I may.
Yeah, I think it builds nicely on what's been said, actually. It's about being agile and nimble and flexible and being able to adapt your style. We do not know the sort of things that we're going to need to lead on going forwards. So it's about having that toolkit in your pocket to be able to adjust and adapt to the needs of the organisation. But I think the overriding point would be 2 things. One, never settle for what we've got, always looking for the future, always relentless focus on what is coming over the horizon so that you're preparing and thinking and having those good conversations with your CEO, and radical candor. That between the 2 of you, you're always, as I say, kicking the tires on everything. You're your critical friend. You're challenging the chief exec on their thinking. They're challenging you on yours, and it's a mutual relationship.
Thank you. Michelle, I'll turn to you next.
Yeah, I think very similar. I would say needing to be open and always needing to be learning. So and the other phrase I use a lot with my team is to sort of look up and out always. Don't just keep your eyes inward. We need to be thinking what's going on around us, what are the things that are coming over the horizon, how are we thinking and learning in all of those the complex world that we live in. So I would say definitely being open, learning, and looking up and out for me.
Thank you. And Dorothy, that resonates a lot with a phrase you told me a couple of years ago, which I now steal and use as if it's my own, which is I want people around me who bring the outside world in. I think that resonates quite clearly with what Michelle said, would you not say?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, completely. And I guess I agree with what's already been said, and I think the other thing I would add is that piece around don't forget though to celebrate and be confident about what you bring. I think sometimes people have put HR, CPOs in kind of, oh, that's the nice, soft, fluffy things. If only those of us that have worked in that space could have lots of nice, soft, fluffy things. And I think sometimes we forget, do you know what? We are strong, we are confident, we bring such credibility to an organisation, and we need to remember that when we're in the room and when we are that confident and that challenger to the CEO. We're there for a really good reason, because we are driving that critical people agenda.
It sounds, I mean, that's wonderful. We'll bring things to a close there because I'm not sure I can match that. As we go into the second half of the most restless decade, it looks like we are in safe hands for a long time. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Kerry. Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, Tiger. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for your comments. We're now going to take a short 5-minute break, and then we'll be back afterwards for the final session of the conference, in which I'm going to be joined by 5 of the leading chief executives to talk about the other side of this conversation. But thank you all. Really good to see you. I hope you have a good rest of your week.